All right, so let's start looking at some homework, shall we? All right. I don't know how to get out of here once I'm in. Maybe this way. That'll work. So, why don't you tell me what homework problems you want to look at? And don't say all of them, because we don't have that much time. I'll just write them down, so we've got a list here. Does anybody have any particular ones that they want me to go over?
We do number 58, just like a refresher on the payroll plan.
58? Yeah. And that's one of the ones that on the list here too. Any others?
I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay.
I'm not too sure.
Yeah, oh, and if you don't, are you able to get in now? Yeah. Let me pull up.
It was the one that had all the extra folders on top of it, and it was talking about the NBA player or the NBA
Okay.
WNBA employees.
Okay. So. That was probably.
I think it was.
This one?
Yeah, and it was this one too, the key or the last part of it.
The last part of it here. So additional
Yeah.
locks and keys.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember. I know there was one problem that in the past. It looks like they've maybe eliminated it though. That a lot of students had
The
problems with.
one specifically was the non-discretionary bonus one, but the whole thing would be fine to go over.
Okay. 70. I got a list here of some others. Any others that you want me to? Okay, I know there was. No, not that one. Nope, not that one. This is one that a lot of students often have trouble with. So this is for overtime hours for a tipped employee. So this is number 36. I'll look at it too. There's also which one was the calculation of, oh, maybe is this it? No. No, it wasn't that one. I think it was not that one either. Sorry. Louisa, it was one of the ones that we talked about. Not to pick on you, but it was the calculation of for the number of hours. Where if the employee was late, they were docked pay.
It might have been like 30, 34.
It's not that one either. Where did it go?
The reduction was when you added up the hours for each day.
Right.
With an, I did it, and I hit a line of having to subtract each day. It makes sense.
Jeez.
You all right?
Yeah.
It was one of the ones that I first grade had.
Yes, you are right. I thought that was a good one. I wrote these down and then I didn't bring my sheet of paper with me. Yeah, something along these lines. So the card compute the following. It wasn't exactly this one, but we can work on that one too. So that's 47. Okay. If any others come up, what's that? Oh, okay. So let's start with number 36 because that was one that I know I've got a lot of students that. Let's see if we can make this any bigger. All right, so here we got Gabrielle Pavone, waitress at Hole in the Wall restaurant. She worked 42 hours this week, collected over $500 in tips. Restaurant uses the full tip credit against the minimum wage and pays her the minimum required for tipped employees. All right. So recall that the employer always has to pay at least $2.13 an hour for hours up to 40 hours in the work week, right? Doesn't matter if she made $10,000 in tips. Employer is still responsible for paying that $2.13 an hour. So, from the restaurant, so they want us to determine her gross pay from the restaurant. How much does the restaurant have to pay her? She's already received the $500 in tips. We really don't have to worry about that right now. This is how much the restaurant is required to pay her. So for the 40 hours, they've got to pay her the $2.13 an hour, right? Again, this is number 36. Times 40 hours is, what do we figure, is it 85.20?
Yeah.
85.20 for the 40 hours. Now, she didn't just work 40 hours though. She worked 42 hours. Which means the employer is also going to have to pay her overtime. Now that tip credit, if you look at the regular time, $7.25 an hour is our minimum wage, minus the tip credit. This is the amount that we assume that is made up in tips, off of there, which is $5.12 an hour. That's what gets us to $2.13. This tip credit is the same regardless of the, so it's the same when we calculate overtime as well. So what we have to do to figure out how much the employer pays for overtime hours, calculate what she should have made per hour for overtime if she didn't have any tips. So $7.25 an hour times 1.5. Our overtime rate, it rounds to $10.88 an hour. So if you're making minimum wage, any hours worked over 40 need to be paid at least $10.88 per hour. The tip credit remains the same. It doesn't change. So minus 512 gets us to $5.76 an hour. That then is the overtime minimum wage for tipped employees that the employer has to pay. So you simply take that wage, so again, this is the overtime minimum with the tip credit. Okay, $5.76 an hour. So the employer has to pay her for those 2 hours at $5.76 an hour. So the first part here, 85.20, there's A. B is 576, the overtime wage for tipped employees, times 2 hours, which gets us to what? I'm sorry, times 2. 1152. So pay for the overtime hours, pay for a regular, 85.20, and 1152. So again, that tip credit for overtime it's not gonna change. It's the same for the regular wage and the overtime wage. That make sense? Okay, so just remember that 576, if it's somebody who's making minimum wage, basically. Okay? All right, let's look at another one here. 36, let's look at 47, kind of go in order here. Okay, so this is calculating time. So we've got Villegas Incorporated recently converted from a 5-day, 40-hour work week to a 4-day, 40-hour work week. So now they're working 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. Overtime is continued to be paid at 1.5 times the regular hourly rate for all hours worked beyond 40 in the week. Time is recorded under the continental system, so the military time, as shown on the time card below. Are you all familiar? I know Steve is familiar with military time. No, not at all. Are you all familiar with military time? So it's based on 24 hours, right? So 2002 is 8:02 p.m. Let's see. Out in 1801 is 6:01 p.m. So you don't have to worry about AM or PM. If it's beyond 12, then it's going to be PM. All right. Sue Ellen Boggs is part of the Group B employees whose regular work week is Tuesday through Friday. So those are her 4 days. Working hours each day are 8 to 12, and then 12:30 to 6:30. I'm sorry, 4:30, and then 6 to 8. That's a long day. So she gets half an hour off here, probably for lunch, and then it looks like an hour and a half off for dinner. Company disregards any time before 8 o'clock, between 12 and 12:30, and between 4:30 and 6, and permits employees to ring in up to 10 minutes late before there's any deduction for tardiness. Deductions are made to the nearest quarter of an hour for workers who are more than 10 minutes late ringing in. Okay, so if they're more than 10 minutes late, if they're 11 minutes late, they get docked for 15 minutes, essentially. It's a quarter of an hour, right? All right, so here is the time card. So Tuesday through Friday, and it looks like this is kind of backwards, but all right. So she clocked in at 7:55 a.m., clocked out at noon, clocked in at 12:30, out at 4:30, in at 6:01, out at 8:02. So there's no time docked here. She wasn't late, and it says that they disregard any time before 8 o'clock. So just because she clocked in at 7:55, they're not going to pay her for that time. Okay, she would understand that, right? She should understand that. So on Tuesday, now they're wanting you to convert to a decimal as well, just to make things interesting. So on Tuesday, we're going to take these in chunks. So essentially, because there's no additional pay for that 5 minutes, she's 8 to noon, 4 hours. 12:30 to 4:30, another 4 hours. And then 6 to 8, another 2 hours. So Tuesday's pretty easy. She worked 4 plus 4 plus 2 hours, 10 hours, right? Let's see. Where's my check my work? All right. This is a little bit big. Wednesday. Okay. So here she clocked in at 7:50 a.m. Again, they don't count that. She starts at 8, right? If she's clocking in expecting to get paid, then her supervisor probably needs to talk to her about that. So 7:50 to 12:02, 4 hours. 12:31, so she was 1 minute late, but they don't start counting that off until she's 10 minutes late. to 4:31, And then here she was 9 minutes late, so she wasn't 10 minutes late, to 8 o'clock. So we got the same, right? 8 to 12, 12:30 to 4:30. So 4 hours, and 2 hours. So we should have another 10 hours. Okay. Now let's see Thursday. All right, Thursday she was late. She was 13 minutes late. Means she's going to be docked a quarter of an hour, right? So between clock in and clock out, now she was right on time pretty much the rest of the day. So we're going to have to dock her a quarter of an hour, 15 minutes on this one. So this is 3.75 hours, 4 hours, and 2 hours. So 9.75 hours in total. Does everybody see how that I got that? Let's see. So we've got our 3.75, and that's for 8:15 to noon. 4 hours, and that's for noon 30 to 4:30. And then another 2 hours from, 1800 to, and I know that there were a few minutes there, but they don't count those, right? Add those up, 9.75. Alrighty, let's look at Friday. Yeah.
Are they always gonna have like notes like it does down below, like on Thursday, 13 minutes late?
They might, because that might be something that, when the supervisor is looking through the time cards, because normally a supervisor will be approving time cards, it's something that might need to be addressed.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So, it would be a good idea to have that, not a requirement, but that would be there just for disciplinary reasons. And the fact that we're deducting, so if there's any, also it makes it really easy if she's like, wait a minute, why did I get deducted? Why did I not get paid $10 or for 10 hours? Now they know. You can tell right away why. Friday, 7:59 to 12:03. Again, that's another 4 hours. 12:38. Okay, she was late again, but she was only 8 minutes late. So we're not going to deduct anything for that. To 4:35, and then 6 to 8 o'clock. So again, we've got 10 hours in total on Friday. Now she worked on Saturday as well. So she worked from 8 a.m. to noon on Saturday, 4 hours. So total hours for the week, that's easy, we're gonna just add all those up, right? So what do we have? 39.75, 43.75, I get that right? 43.75 hours. Regular weekly earnings. Now we're talking about what she made in regular time, not the total weekly earnings. That's another question down here. Just in regular time. So we're going to use how many hours? How many hours would be regular hours? 40, exactly. They've given us her hourly rate up here, $10.45 an hour. All right, so 40 times $10.45, $418 for her regular earnings. I'm assuming it's wants the decimals. Overtime earnings, and they tell you right here, the company rounds the overtime rate to 3 decimal point places. Now they've given you the overtime rate up here. We're going to use the number that includes 3 decimal places. And then we're going to round the total amount. So how many hours of overtime? 3 3/4, right? 3.75. times that overtime rate, which is 15,675. Now we're gonna round this, so 58.78 for overtime. Total weekly earnings, how do we get that? Yeah, we're just gonna add them together, exactly. So 418 plus 58.78, 476.78. Check my work. Make sense? You do have to read every word. I find that that's where a lot of students kind of, especially accounting students, we're not the best readers, we're not the best writers. Words are hard to, we pick out numbers really easily, right? And we remember numbers really easily. Words are a little fuzzier for our brains. But you do have to read every word in these problems because you can miss critical factors in there. All right. Next up, let's look at, what was 48? And if we spend the rest of the period going through this, that's fine too. We've got enough time for chapter 3. Let's see, what is this one? So Kyle Foreman, this one was on a list of questions. Kyle Foreman worked 47 hours during the week for Erickson Company at 2 different jobs. Okay. His pay rate was $14 for the first 40 hours. His pay rate was $11.80 for the other 7 hours. So determine his gross pay for that week if the company uses the 1/2 average rate method. Okay, so I said weighted average method. They're saying 1/2 average rate method. We can go back to, let's go ahead and reference this. Let's see, make sure that fits with the, so, do I have the right example here? Yes. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do, we gotta calculate the earnings from all of his jobs at the total rate. Again, we're gonna use the overtime premium amount here. So, we've got job 1, we have here $14 an hour for 40 hours. What do we have there? $560. And then the next one here is $11.80 times 7 hours. $82.60. Gonna add those together. So $642.60. Now we got some overtime though, don't we? So we gotta figure out what the overtime rate is that we're gonna use. So we're gonna take the step 1 result divided by the total number of hours worked. Okay. So this is step 1. Step 2, 642.60 divided by 47. So 13, let's see, round your overtime rate and other interim computations to 2 decimal places and use the rounded amount in subsequent computations. Round the final answers to the nearest cent. Okay, so we're gonna round everything, I think, to 2 decimal places. So 1367. Oh, it does say to round the overtime rate. Let's see if that's right. So we'll take the step 2 result, multiply it by 0.5. Whoops. here's our overtime premium. Excuse me. So $684 is our overtime premium. Step 4, we're gonna take the step 3 result times the number of hours in overtime. 684 times 7 hours. $47.88. Last step, we're going to take the step 4 result plus the step 1 result. So, 642.60 plus 47.88. $690.48. Follow those steps that are listed right there. All right. If a prior agreement existed that overtime would be paid at the rate for the job performed after the 40th hour, what would the gross pay be? So he was paid for $560 for the first 40 hours. We would use the 1180 rate for our overtime calculation, right? So take 1180 times 7 times 1.5. We don't have to use the overtime premium here. $123.90. $683.90. Okay. So this is comparing method B and method C, or method 2 and method 3. I think they used letters to describe it. So the they're calling it the 1/2 average rate method, and I don't know, maybe that's a better description. I think of it as weighted average. But make sense? Questions? So use the this is in there. You can see the agendas. I leave those up. Okay, to follow those steps. No questions? All right. What's next? So that was 48. So I think 49 would be similar. Yeah. So 49 would be the similar types of calculations. So I'm not going to go through that one. What did we do here? 36, 47. So 58. We've got 54 as well. Let me see how many of these are similar. All right, let's do this one. This is number 54. And you guys will enjoy when I get some wrong, because that always happens. By the way, I do something wrong. Usually I've typed something in wrong, transposed numbers or something. So Sheila Williams is a medical secretary. She earns $35.75 monthly. So let's write this down, $35.75 a month. for a 35-hour work week. Squeaky sound of the dryer race. For overtime work, she receives extra pay at the regular hourly rate up to 40 hours. So she's not going to get paid overtime rate for any hours between 35 and 40. She'll get paid for it, but it's going to be at her regular hourly rate, which we're going to have to calculate what that is. And time and a half beyond 40 hours in any week. During one semi-monthly pay period, she worked 10 hours of overtime. Only 2 hours of this overtime were beyond 40 hours in any 1 week. Compute the following amounts. All right, so her regular semi-monthly earnings, how would we figure that one out? So she earns $35.75 a month, and she gets paid semi-monthly. So that's how many times a month? Twice a month, right? So we could just take the $35.75 and divide it by 2, right? We could annualize it if we wanted to do that. We're going to end up with the same amount. Let's go ahead and do that since that's how they show us in the slides. So $35.75 a month times 12 months. Oops, that's not right. $35.75 times 12 months would be $42,900 a year. Divided by 24 pays, she gets $1787.50. If you divided $35.75 by 2, you get the same thing. You guys can all figure that out. But in this case, I'm just using the steps. So regular semi-monthly earnings, $1787.50. Yeah.
Would it be 26 or 24?
24.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's semi-monthly. If it were bi-weekly, I think they said semi-monthly, right? Semi-monthly, yep.
Okay.
Yep. Bi-weekly would be 26. Okay. So $1787.50. All right. Now, they want us to calculate her overtime earnings. In order to do that, we've got to figure out what her hourly rate is, right? Now, in this case, I think they're including the regular pay rate for hours between 35 and 40, because they're defining up here for overtime work, she receives the extra pay. So we're going to include both the time and a half time and the regular earnings. Okay, so but first thing we have to do is figure out on an hourly basis how much she works or how much she earns, right? So in order to do that, we've got to figure out how much does she make on a weekly basis, and then divide that by her normal work hours, which are 35, not 40, right? So this is how much her normal rate of pay is. So $1787.50, well, we'll do it their way. We'll annualize it again. So $35.75 times 12, so $42,900. Actually, I'm going to use the 2,000. No, I'm not going to use the 2,080 because she works 35 hours during the week, not 40. So I can't use that. So we'll start with this step one, the annual salary divided by 52 weeks in the year. She makes $825 a week, right? She normally works 35 hours a week. So we'll just divide that by 35 hours. Her hourly rate is $23.57. Hello. Okay, so $23.57 an hour. So I did that by $35.75 times 12, $42,900, and then I divided that by 52 weeks to get $825 a week. And then I divided that by 35 hours a week to get to 23, what did I say here? $23.57 per hour is what she makes. All right, so that is her regular hourly rate. She worked during this pay period, she worked a total of 10 hours of overtime 2 hours of that were over and above 40 hours a week. So how many regular hours did she work? That between that 35 and 40? 8, right. We're just gonna take the 40 hours, so, I'm sorry, the 10 hours of total overtime and subtract the 2 hours of just regular overtime, of time and a half, I'll call it. She kind of has 2 different overtimes here, right? She's got her regular pay overtime and her time and a half overtime. Does everybody get that? Because those hours between 5, so she normally works 35 hours a week. But if she works up to 40 hours a week, they're not going to pay her time and a half for that. They'll just pay her at a regular hourly rate for those hours, which is $23.57 an hour, right? So, and they're telling us that in total, her overtime was 10 hours. But only 2 of those hours were essentially at time and a half overtime. They're calling both sets of time overtime here, but only 2 hours of that is actually going to be paid at time and a half. That's what they're legally required to do. So they're not going above and beyond that. They could choose to pay her time and a half for those hours, but they choose not to. So we've got a total of 10 hours, total overtime, 10 hours. And then we've got time and a half, well, how am I going to phrase this? Hours over 40. We've got 2. So we've got 8 left of regular, we'll call it regular overtime hours. Being paid at the regular rate, but for her, it's overtime. So we've got 8 hours that are going to be worked at the $23.57. We got to calculate that. $188.56. Then we've got to deal with this other 2 hours, where it was over 40 hours in a week. So what's her rate of pay going to be for those 2 hours that were over 40 hours? Just tell me the calculation. You don't have to tell me the answer.
Like 23.57 times 1.5.
Exactly. 23.57 times 1.5. So 35, and I think they want us to, let's see, round all divisions to 2 decimal places, use rounding methods. And that's okay. Well, 35, we'll call it 35.36. Hopefully that's what they want. So 35.36 times 2 hours. $70.72. So her total overtime are these 2 amounts, right? So 70.72 plus 188.56, 259.28. Hopefully I rounded like they wanted to. By the way, if you're sure you did the calculation right and it's still not coming up right, I would suggest you try rounding up or down one. Because sometimes that's what it is. A lot of times that's what it is. So, there we go. 259.28. Last part of this is super easy. We're just going to add those 2 together, right? So 1787.50 plus 259.28, 204.678. For those 2. Lots of steps there, and the fact that they use the term overtime for hours that we conceptually really don't think of as overtime, it's over her regular time, what she's regularly contracted to do, but it's not technically overtime as far as the FLSA would be concerned. Kind of makes it a little bit confusing. Questions about this one? Okay, let me find that below one. See if I can mess up that one. Do you remember which number that one was? The 58?
It's letter C on
Yeah. We'll go through, I'll go through all of them here. Let me erase this. Oh. So Carrie Ortiz, Carrie Ortiz works a fluctuating work schedule. All right, we're gonna have to use this one to help us out, this example. Besides her fixed salary of $1,050 per week, her employment agreement provides for overtime pay at an extra half rate for hours worked over 40. This week she worked 48 hours. Compute the following amounts. Round all divisions to 2 decimal places and use the rounded amounts in subsequent computations. Round your final answers to the nearest cent. Okay, so the overtime, all right, so she works, and it's per week, right? Overtime pay, and she worked 48 hours. So she gets an extra half rate for hours worked over 40. Some of you have already done this, so tell me how you worked it. Overtime pay at an extra half rate for hours worked over 40. So we've got to figure out what her full rate is in order to figure out what that half rate is, right? All right. Let's see, which method do we use here? 1 or 2? Can't really say, do they? Do they have it in here? They don't really say which one they're using, 1 or 2, do they? Do you have anything in the example in those first 2? How are they using this? Divided by the 48 hours. Okay, so they're using the first method here. So 1050, and this is per week. So we already have the per week amount, the 1050. Divided by the total number of hours worked, which is 48, right? So 1050 21, and again 2188. So this is our regular rate, 2188 times 0.5. This is the additional 0.5 that they pay. 1094. And she worked 8 hours of overtime. Let's see. Employment agreement, overtime, over 40. 8 times 10, 94. 8752. So this is for the pay for the overtime, and then we'll pay the regular 1050 plus 8752. We have here 7, 8, 3, 1137, 52. Let's see. Oh, just the overtime earnings. Sorry, I probably stepped ahead there. So yeah.
So, could you do, like, if it wasn't asked, I'm just still confused why it's dividing by 48 instead of 40 in this.
Okay, because, so they've already, there are 2 different methods, ways of doing it. You could divide it by 48, this is the method in which they're describing in this problem, but it's not used in the same, the wording is a little bit different. It means that, so that the full amount is already assumed in this 1,050, like the one part of it is already, for the overtime, is already assumed in that 1,050. So it's only the additional, I know it's kind of hard to understand. It's only the additional 8 because of the contract and how the contract is written. Because she's salaried, right? Her salary is 1,050.
Okay.
Right? So that means, and as long as she's paid for overtime, and as long as she meets that minimum wage requirement, they're fine as far as the FLSA. Now, obviously, it's gonna vary, her rate's gonna vary every pay period, right? That overtime rate could vary every pay period. If she works 49 hours the next pay period, then that overtime rate is gonna be, so we're gonna divide that by 49. She's actually kind of penalized because it's gonna bring down that overtime rate,
Okay.
right? It's just part of the contract, and as long as it still meets those requirements of meeting the minimum wage and the fact that she is being paid 1.5 times whatever her regular rate is, then they are allowed to calculate it in that manner.
Okay.
I know it seems weird because you're like, where's the 1? Wait, I've only got the 0.5. Where's the extra 1? It's already wrapped into that 1,050.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so 87.52 total earnings, 1137.52. All right. If this was a BELO plan with a pay rate of $22 an hour and a maximum of 53 hours, how much would she be paid for 48 hours? Well, the fact that the maximum, she's actually under the maximum, means that it makes this a little bit less complicated. We don't have to calculate the amount over her contracted rate because there isn't any amount over her contracted rate. So let's take a look at, we'll look at the sample here. Let's see. So her regular, how do I do this? So pay rate of $22 an hour, maximum of 53 hours. So we would take the $22 times her maximum number of hours, which is 53. Oh. Hold on. I need the points here. It's 53 hours. So 1166. So they're giving us some different circumstances here. We have to figure out what the overtime premium amount is. 22 times 0.5 is, it's 11, right? And we would take that overtime premium times the number of hours of overtime contracted. So that maximum. So in this case, it's 13 hours. So 11 times 13. $143. So we'll add this, so her regular salary then is going to be the 1166 plus the 143. 1309. This is her regular salary for any hours up to 53 hours. She didn't work 53 hours, she worked 48 hours. Right, so we don't have to if she worked over the 53 hours, then we would have to calculate an overtime rate for the hours over and above that contracted rate. But it's already assumed, so this 1309 is already baking in overtime into her regular salary. Okay, so. All right. I know that's the BELO is tough. Like I said, it's the one that the students struggle with the most. And I know I did not get through all of those problems, but hopefully at least the ones that I did get through will help you then with the ones that you continue to have questions about. Feel free to email me though. Okay, with the questions. Anything else?